Alright, what's up? So this video is going to be a lot shorter than the last one. Sorry if I sound really weird, I think I'm getting sick, but I've got a day off work, so I figured I'd record this anyway. This video is just going to go over how to kind of optimize your PC setup and settings to have a very smooth experience when playing first-person shooters. I feel like a lot of people have a very unoptimized setup based on what I've seen from personal experience. But just as a disclaimer, most of these things are not required for you to play well or get better. It'll just kind of help you perform closer to your potential. So the video is going to be split up into two parts. The first part's just going to be like your physical setup, so going over like your desk, peripherals, computer, things that are physical that are going to help you play a little bit better. And then the next one's just going to be software, so Windows settings, kind of my philosophy on in-game settings as well. All right, so to start out, your physical setup, starting with just your computer, I would say get a computer that can run your game that you play, whatever game it is, at a frame rate higher than the monitor's refresh rate, or at least close. If you're playing like a game, like, I don't know, Battlefield's a good example. I don't run Battlefield at, 240 plus frames per second all the time. So, certain games you won't really be able to without buying crazy hardware, so don't worry about it too much. But if you're playing like Counter-Strike or Overwatch or an esports title, this shouldn't be super hard. So just kind of, if you haven't bought a computer yet, and you're looking to buy one, I would say watch some little benchmark playthroughs on YouTube of whatever game you're trying to play. There's so many videos on YouTube of people using whatever combination of components that you can think of at whatever in-game settings, and they'll just show you the average frame rate that they get and 1% lows and everything. So you can just know exactly what kind of performance you can expect if you build a computer with those parts. The next thing is going to be a mouse. So I'm someone who's bought a lot of mice. I probably have like 8 mice in my closet. I'll just say this, don't feel like you have to keep buying like the new mouse gimmick or whatever that comes out, Like recently Logitech's come out with the whole, I don't even know what it's called, Super Strike or whatever the fuck it is. It's basically just a different type of switch on the click to make it a little bit lower latency. Like, don't feel like you have to keep buying that stuff to perform at the highest level. Like, people have been playing at a really high level without that stuff for, 15, 20 years. So, it's good to buy new stuff and to buy stuff you're comfortable with, but don't feel like you have to buy whatever gimmick comes out. My advice would be just buy something that's under 80 grams with a shape that you like and at least 1,000 hertz polling rate. And that uses a modern optical sensor from like the last 10 to 15 years. So basically most gaming mice. I would say get wireless if you can. I do really like wireless, but it isn't really required as long as you like cable manage properly. Like if you have a wired mouse, you can get, I think they're called like mouse bungees, or you can even just put an object over, like you can like pull the cable out and then just put an object over it so it doesn't fall off the end of your desk. Because when you have like a wired mouse, and you have it the wire hanging over the desk, you'll get this weird inconsistency where you pull one direction and you're like pulling against the wire, and then the other direction you're not, and it's like, it just fucks you up. So, if you're gonna get a wired mouse, just manage the cable properly and it should be fine. And then something that's a little bit underrated that I don't see a lot of people talk about, change your mouse feet if you haven't changed them in a while. It's not going to be a crazy difference, but it does make it a little bit more smooth on your mouse pad. A lot of people's mouse feet are really fucking worn out or just straight up like dirty, and it makes it really inconsistent when you're like running it over a mouse pad. So change those out. They make tons of different mouse feet on like Amazon, and you can just buy them specifically for your mouse. Tons of different brands. Just, see what has good reviews and just buy that. They're all pretty much the same kind of thing. And then the next thing I would say is a mouse pad. You don't have to buy any sort of crazy mouse pad, just something that isn't inconsistent. Like if you have a really dirty ass mouse pad and it's got a bunch of weird slow spots or whatever, it's just really worn out. Either A, wash it, you know, figure out, you know, YouTube tutorial how to like wash it properly, because some don't really like certain methods, so you know you gotta kind of know what you're doing. Or B, just buy a new mouse pad. Don't buy anything super gimmicky like the ones with like a bunch of lights on them, or whatever that, you know, or the ones that wireless charge, or I don't know, like you don't need that shit. Like most of those have a really shitty surface on them. So I would just buy from like brands that, you know, are pretty, make pretty quality mouse pads. So like Razer makes a few decent ones. I used to use the Strider for a long time. That was a really good one. It's kind of a clone of an Artisan mouse pad. Zowiano makes some pretty good ones. And then Artisan, of course, those are a little more expensive, but I do really like those. I think I'm using like a Key 83 right now. Those are pretty, it's pretty good mouse pad. I like the surface on it. You know, some people really like fast mouse pads, like even the glass ones. Some people like the slower ones. Just make sure it's consistent. Like, it's kind of personal preference. I would say stay away from like just total mud pads though, from like, you know, like I don't know, a QCK, like the SteelSeries QCK. That was my first mouse pad. That thing was slow as fuck, and it wires out so quick. So stay away from stuff like that, I would say. But other than that, like, just stick to brands that are like pretty good and make good mouse pads. You can find reviews on YouTube, or even probably like Reddit or something. And then the next thing, your monitor. Monitor is kind of important, along with, you know, the computer that can push the frames out as well. Your monitor's kind of like, you got to think about it like your eyes into whatever game you're playing. So like if you buy a shitty monitor, you're making your eyes kind of shitty. I would say you don't need to buy anything crazy to be competitive. You just need something that's at least 144 hertz, 1 millisecond or lower latency, and at least 1080p. I will say 1440p is really nice, but I don't think it's required. Currently, I play on 1440p 240 hertz OLED, and this monitor is really great. But I can't say that when I switch to it from like even a 144 hertz monitor, my performance is like that much different. I mean, it's definitely noticeable, the difference between 144 and 240, but like, again, it's just, once you start going higher and higher refresh rates, you're going to get diminishing returns as far as like how clear the game is to you, and everything. So if you can afford 240 hertz, it's a nice upgrade, but 144 hertz is kind of all you need, I would say. And then moving on, a keyboard. Just get any keyboard you're comfortable with. I know like some games like Counter-Strike and Valorant, a lot of the players use like Hall effect keyboards, because the input timing allows you to be a little bit more precise, but I don't think that's necessarily like a necessity. I would just get something that you're comfortable with, probably a mechanical keyboard. I find membrane keyboards a little bit like mushy and just kind of imprecise, so just get like some cheap mechanical keyboard. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, and you know, get switches that you think feel nice. Moving on, chair and desk, really underrated. You should probably find, first of all, a solid desk, something that's made out of really solid materials. Like mine's like metal and wood, and I've used this thing for forever. And it has enough space on it to where I can put, you know, all of my shit on there, and nothing's like running into each other. And then a chair. Buy a chair that's you think is comfortable. Don't necessarily buy like a racing style chair or whatever. Those are gonna kind of put a weird angle in your back, I feel like. Right now I'm in kind of like one of those style of chairs, and I've been wanting to get a new one for a while. I just haven't. I'm probably gonna go look at some sort of like ergonomic like office chair. I really do like chairs that you can take the arms off of, because typically when I'm playing, I'm scooted way up to the desk, and I like resting a lot of my arm onto the desk, so I don't really need like the chair arms, right? So, you know, chairs that you can kind of take the arms off of, and it's not gonna like fuck with the structure of it, is like, that's a pretty good bonus. And then I would say, as far as ergonomically, just make sure that your chair and desk combo allow your arm to essentially not be at a weird angle to your desk. Like for me, I play with my arm pretty much all the way on the desk and just like my elbow kind of hanging off. I'm even at like a bit of an angle to the desk, uh, kind of facing my monitor. Don't get something that's like where your chair's like way fucking higher than your desk and your arm is like pointed downwards, or even worse I would say is when your chair is way lower than your desk and your arm is like your elbow is like pointed towards the ground and it's like your arm's like hanging off the desk. Like that's just gonna be really uncomfortable. As far as chair and desk goes, just get something comfortable that allows you to kind of, I don't know, find a spot on your desk that is kind of ergonomic for you and helps you be more comfortable while you're playing. Because that'll, if you're uncomfortable while you're playing, it's just gonna distract the fuck out of you. So just don't. I would say don't necessarily cheap out on stuff like that. You know, a lot of people like to cheap out on desks and chairs, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. So just some extra miscellaneous things that you might consider buying. Monitor arms. I have a set of monitor arms for both my monitors, and it's honestly kind of nice just being able to move them wherever I want, however close to my face I want them. Uh, and I don't have to worry about the stand underneath, getting in the way of like my mouse pad or keyboard or anything. It's just a lot easier to move them around. If you're gonna buy a monitor arm though, don't buy like a really cheap one. Again, because if you have a really expensive monitor and you buy like a really cheap mount and it fails, your expensive monitor might get fucked up. So buy something that actually has like a really good, I think it's like a piston kind of system in there that is able to hold your monitors. Like I've had these for years, and they have never failed me once. So just buy something quality if you're gonna buy monitor arms. Other than that, you might also look into buying like a arm sleeve. Personally, I don't have a lot of experience using one of these, but I know a lot of professional players use them, and I've even had a Quake professional tell me that he really thinks like arm sleeves are like a kind of night and day difference as far as his like tracking ability goes, and just consistency. Basically, all they do is it's just a sleeve around your mouse arm, and it allows your arm to kind of have the same amount of friction to your desk, and depending on like how humid your desk is or whatever, or how sweaty your arm gets, your arm can like, kind of stick to your desk, and this sleeve will kind of just keep that from happening. Also, if you get really cold hands like me, it might be beneficial just because it keeps the rest of your arm a little bit warmer. So, you'll have less chance of getting a cold hands or anything like that. And then lastly, sound. I would say, if you're looking into buying some headphones, you can buy like a cheap gaming headset that just has like, a mic and decent sound quality. But if you can, I would say buy some nice like studio headphones and then a separate mic, because both of those are just going to sound way better than like the combos. But I know that does usually cost extra money. It's kind of personal preference, but I really enjoy having like a decent pair of headphones and then a decent mic. All right, so for this next part, it's going to be just Windows settings. So first things first, open up your settings and go to System and then Display. And then you're going to scroll all the way down to Advanced Display. And then, let me see. I'll just go to my monitor here and make sure this number right here is the highest you can set it to. A lot of people will buy like high refresh rate monitors, like 144 hertz or higher, and then not even have it set to use that in Windows, and they just don't even know any better, which, it's whatever, but you should set this to the highest number you can, and that'll actually allow your monitor to run at the higher refresh rate, and you can actually see the higher frame rates that you're achieving in game. And then the next thing is go to your mouse settings, and then let's see, additional mouse settings, and then you're going to go over to pointer options and make sure this is turned off, this enhanced pointer precision. Essentially, that is Windows mouse acceleration, and you don't want mouse acceleration on typically. Most games have like a raw input feature, which usually turns this off in game. But either way, some games don't have it, some games do. So just turn it off in Windows so you don't have to worry about it. And your mouse is going to be a lot more like consistent, you know. You don't want any weird acceleration values on moving your mouse. You want it to just be 1-to-1 pretty much all the time, unless you have one of those like custom acceleration apps and you want to mess around with that. But you know, that's a whole different can of worms. So most people just turn this off, you know, have no mouse acceleration, and you're gonna be just fine. uh and then I would say the next thing is going to be an NVIDIA control panel. If you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, there might be, you know, settings on like an AMD or Intel card uh, that you might be able to kind of replicate here. But first of all, G-Sync. I typically turn G-Sync off. I'm pretty sure G-Sync will kind of give you a little bit higher latency, but also I think it kind of limits your frame rate a little bit in game. Like if you can achieve frames higher than what your monitor is, then you should do that, because you're basically getting newer frames sent to your monitor. Even if, you know, if you have a 144 hertz monitor and you can run 180 FPS in game, you should do that, because it's like the extra frames, you're just getting more updated frames sent to your monitor basically. Whereas if you had like G-Sync on and the game's just limited to 144, like, yeah, you wouldn't have quite as much screen tearing, I guess, every now and then, but you really shouldn't have screen tearing if you're already running over your refresh rate. So I would say turn this off for most like competitive uses. If you're playing just like a random single player game, you know, you could turn it on if you want it to be a little smoother. And then moving on to 3D settings here. So this is gonna like kind of control some settings that your graphics card uses to like render things. The main one I would look at here is low latency mode. You want that set to ultra. And then you can set a max frame rate here as well. I usually set it to 360. Certain games, like I'll go into program settings and set them myself, you know, like a higher frame rate cap, but I usually set my normal frame rate cap to 360 because I just don't feel like, you know, certain games, if I can run way higher than that, I don't really care about running higher than 360 FPS. It's not really going to do anything for me. And then the last thing here is power management mode. Set that to perform maximum performance. So that'll just pretty much always run your GPU at the highest amount of power it can draw, you know, as long as the cooling is good enough, basically. So all of this stuff essentially just means your game's going to be a little bit lower latency and probably slightly higher frames. All right, so moving on to in-game settings, I'm just going to use Overwatch as an example. I would say most of this stuff applies to other games, just the, I guess, kind of attitude I have when like trying to set my in-game settings for like a first-person shooter. It all kind of transfers from game to game. So basically, you're just going to use most of the time full screen. You can kind of use borderless on certain games. You might want to do some research on whether or not that increases latency. It kind of depends on the game, I think, and if you're using like Windows 10 or 11. And then resolution, obviously set this to be, you know, either the highest, or if you're running like a custom resolution, then set it for that. And then certain games will put like a refresh rate in here as well. Make sure that's set on the highest, or else it'll basically default your monitor to a lower refresh rate whenever you're running the game. And then, you know, aspect ratio. Some games allow you to run like stretched aspect ratios, and I do that for certain games. Like I think I play stretched in like Rainbow Six, Battlefield, Counter-Strike, Valorant. I like it for more like tac shooters. But games where there's a lot of like vertical movement and shit, like Overwatch, I usually just run 16:9. Uh, and then going to field of view. For Overwatch, I have it maxed out just because Overwatch's field of view is like pretty narrow compared to a lot of other games. Typically, if we're talking about like horizontal degrees, I usually run like 115 horizontal. But really, it's just personal preference. Whatever you think looks the best. You don't have to run it at like the max value, and you don't have to run it at like a super low value. Um, whatever you think kind of looks the best and gives you the best balance between like peripheral vision and precision, like whenever you're trying to aim at something. Other than that, you got another frame rate cap in here. Overwatch, I have it set to where it can run a little bit higher frame rate. So I have it set to like 450, and then in the NVIDIA control panel, I have Overwatch, at a cap of like 450 or something like that. VSync, you want to turn that shit off. Triple buffering, reduce buffering, all that shit. Turn that shit off. That's just gonna like keep your monitor or keep your game at like a certain frame rate, basically, to reduce screen tearing, and you don't really want that because it's just gonna increase your latency, basically, for increased I guess smoothness, reduce screen tearing, but really that shouldn't matter if you're running a high enough frame rate, over your refresh rate anyway. NVIDIA Reflex, I would say turn this on for most games. You can do enabled or boost, whichever one. If you have certain performance problems when you run boost, then just turn it to enabled. And then moving on to quality. For most games, you're going to want to run like pretty low graphics, like as low as you can, just to get as many frames as you can. Some games, I would say there's certain settings that you might want to turn up to like medium or something, because like, for example, on Rainbow Six Siege, if you had shadows at low, you would actually miss out on like player shadows. So you wouldn't be able to see somebody's shadow coming around the corner, which might give you a bit of a disadvantage. So you might want to turn that to medium, for example, in that game. But in here, as far as I know, there's really no downside to running low settings other than the game looks a little bit shittier. But visual clarity wise, you're going to be at a bit of an advantage just because there's not a bunch of shit, all over your screen, a bunch of weird effects and everything like that. But again, this is personal preference. You don't have to run this. I just personally, when I'm playing the game, I don't notice how low my graphics are because I'm just focused on playing the game. So it just doesn't really bother me to run low graphics. But if you like running higher graphics, that's fine. I would just try and dodge a lot of the really crazy effects. If there's something that messes with like lighting or smoke or whatever, stuff that's going to obscure you from being able to like aim at somebody else or see them. You're going to want to kind of turn those down. And then upsampling, if you can, I would say stay away from like FSR and DLSS because they do make your game, especially at longer ranges, kind of blurrier. And then same with like anti-aliasing. If you can, turn anti-aliasing off. Some games don't allow it, some games do. But stuff like SMAA and like TAA and definitely FXAA, stay away from that one. They're just going to make your game look blurrier, and it's going to just be harder to see people, I guess. So turn that off. Some people like, it might look a little bit jarring at first because all the edges around objects are like not really smoothed over. So you're going to see like a lot of, you're going to see a lot of aliasing basically. Like it's going to look very like pixelated, like around objects, but trust me, it's way more, the actual visual clarity difference is way better when you have it off, for most games. And then other than that, a lot of this stuff is personal preference. I just like running low because it gives me better frames. But if you, don't care about that as much, you can run, higher textures or whatever. And then some games have performance stats. So like they'll give you like a little frame counter, or like network latency. I usually turn these on just so I can know if I'm like lagging really bad or on a bad server, or if my frame rates are really shitty. But other than that, that's like pretty much how I set most first-person shooters as far as settings. I try to run as low as I can just to get like decent frame rates, so the game looks smoother and plays better. Because I when I'm playing a first-person shooter, I'm not usually focused on the graphics too much, so I just don't even really notice when the graphics are low. And a lot of games nowadays with low graphics look really good, anyways. Like Battlefield 6 looks pretty crazy even with low graphics, so it really doesn't matter that much. All right, so last few things. If your game has any sort of like camera shake or motion blur, turn all that shit off. Basically, anything that moves like your camera around really weird or makes the screen really blurry or makes your crosshair go off center, turn that shit off. Um, then what else? What else we got? Some games have high precision mouse input, like a setting basically. This is mainly for like higher pulling rate mice, so like anything over 1,000. So if you have like a mouse that's like over 1,000 pulling rate, you might turn something like that on, so that the game kind of knows to process that mouse data. And crosshairs, I would say don't get too crazy about crosshairs. Everybody has like a bunch of crazy like theories about different crosshairs and like all this shit. Really, I'm not like staring directly at my crosshair ever, unless I'm at like really really long range. Um, so like just make something simple and unobstructive. So like right here, I've just got like a really small like green cross, and that's it. Usually I make it like a different color, like green, cyan, pink, something like that, so that it doesn't blend in with whatever colors are on the game. But other than that, that's probably going to be the end of the video. I've got really nothing else I can really add to this. So yeah, see you later.